You already know what you should be doing. That's the thing nobody actually says out loud about self-improvement. It's not an information problem. You know you should exercise. You know you should read more, sleep more, spend less, eat better. You know you should stop doing that one thing you keep doing and start doing the thing you keep not doing. So the question is, so why don't you? That question has a real answer, not a motivational answer. No believe in yourself poster, no just want it more speech. The answer is completely structural, a mechanism that's been sitting in the science of human behavior for decades, quietly buried under every productivity tip, every new morning routine, every just be more disciplined piece of advice that gets thrown at the problem instead of actually solving it. James Clear found it, spent years researching it, then wrote it all down in a book called Atomic Habits, which has now sold over 15 million copies. And look, that number means one of two things. Either it's the best marketed self-help book of the last decade, or it actually works. Probably both, honestly. But before we get into what he found, I want to talk about a sports team that, by every measurable indicator, should not have been able to do what they did. The 2003 British cycling team. And if you want to understand what this book is really arguing, this team is the perfect place to start, because they are living proof of the entire philosophy. To understand the scale of what happened, you have to first understand the weight of their failure, because in 2003, British cycling was the most consistently disappointing national team in the history of their sport. 76 years of Olympic competition, 1 gold medal, total. It was so bad that top bike manufacturers literally refused to sell them equipment, not because the team couldn't pay for it, but because being seen with the British cycling team was considered bad for business. Sit with that for a second. A sports gear company looked at a national Olympic team and decided the association was a liability. When an entire industry views your team as a joke, that expectation of failure seeps into the culture. These were physically capable riders operating inside a system that expected them to lose. That same year, Dave Brailsford took over as performance director. And here's what makes this story different from every other sporting turnaround story. He didn't fire the coaching staff, didn't draft a new roster, didn't bring in some radical, headline-grabbing training philosophy. He did something that sounds, when you first hear it, almost embarrassingly small. And then he made a list of every single thing involved in cycling, not just the obvious things, training, nutrition, race strategy, everything, the angle of the seat, the weight of the tires, the exact biomechanics of how each rider pedaled. He tested different massage gels to find which one led to the fastest muscle recovery. He hired a surgeon to teach his riders the correct way to wash their hands, just to reduce the probability of catching a cold before a race. He determined the specific pillow and mattress that produced the best sleep for each individual rider, and then took those exact pillows to every hotel on the road. He even painted the inside of the team truck stark white, not for branding, so they could spot dust on the bike frames, dust that just might degrade the mechanics and slow a rider down by a fraction of a second. He broke the entire universe of cycling into its smallest possible components, and then he aimed to improve each one by 1%. 1% better sleep, 1% less aerodynamic drag, 1% faster muscle recovery, 1% less friction between the rider and the road. None of it visible to the press, none of it dramatic, all of it compounding. 5 years later, at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the British cycling team won 60% of the gold medals available in their sport. Then they went to London in 2012, home soil, their own crowd, and set 9 world records. Now here's the question that actually matters. Every team in Beijing wanted to win. Every rider on the French, German, and American teams had trained for years. Every coach had a meticulous plan. The wanting was equal. The effort was roughly equal. The goal was identical. Oh, what was different? The system. That's it. That is literally the only thing that was different. Which brings us to the central line of this entire book. And I want you to actually hear it, not just let it wash over you. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall every time, without exception, to the level of your systems. That's what we're taking apart today. How that system actually works, why it works at a level most explanations never reach, and this is the part most summaries skip, where it breaks down, where the framework has real limits that Clear himself barely acknowledges. Because this is a genuinely good book, and genuinely good books deserve honest readers, not just fans. But to get there, we first have to deal with what I call the winner's problem. We just established that systems beat goals. But if that's true, why is our entire culture, corporate, personal, educational, completely obsessed with goal setting? Every January, everyone writes a list of outcomes they want. We've been doing it forever. So what's actually going on? It comes down to a fundamental error in how humans process information: survivorship bias. We look at the people at the top of the podium, the survivors, and we mistakenly attribute their success to their ambitious goals. We hear a billionaire say, "I always set a goal to change the world," and we assume the goal created the billionaire. We completely ignore the millions of people who had the exact same goal, wanted it just as badly, and failed. If successful and unsuccessful people share the exact same goal, the goal cannot be the variable that determines success. Mathematically, it just doesn't hold up. And here's the thing. Even when you do achieve a goal, it can still completely fail you. Clear uses the example of a messy bedroom. Your room is a disaster. You wait for a burst of motivation, spend 3 hours cleaning, and hit the goal. The room is pristine. But if you don't change the underlying habits that caused the mess in the first place, the clothes dropped on the floor, the coffee cups left on the nightstand, you will have a messy room again in 3 weeks. You treated a symptom without addressing the cause. Achieving the goal only changed your life for a fraction of a second. It's a temporary cosmetic solution. The engine driving the behavior was never touched. I experienced this exact thing with running. Years ago, I set a goal to run a 10K, trained for months, ran the race, crossed the finish line, got the medal, and then didn't put on my running shoes for 6 months. The goal was a one-time event. Once the race was over, the structure vanished completely. And this isn't just a personal quirk. This happens at the highest levels of athletics. Olympians frequently report profound feelings of emptiness, sometimes even depression, the day after winning gold. Think about that. They spent a decade optimizing their entire lives for a single day on the calendar. Once that day passes, if they never fell in love with the daily process, if the system wasn't the reward itself, they're left with nothing to run toward, which exposes the deeper psychological trap buried inside goal setting. The implicit assumption behind every goal is, once I reach my target, then I'm allowed to be happy. It's a brutal form of delayed gratification. You're placing your self-worth on layaway. You exist in a constant state of subtle failure until you hit that one specific milestone. Systems invert that completely. If you shift your focus to the process, you don't have to wait to feel satisfied. You succeed every single time the system runs. If your goal is to write a novel, you're failing every day until the book is published. But if your system is to write 200 words every morning, you're a success by 8 a.m. every single day. A useful way to think about it. If you were a basketball coach and you completely ignored the championship goal and focused exclusively on what your team did at practice every single day, the drills, the communication, the recovery, would you still get results? Yes, absolutely. The score takes care of itself. An engine without a steering wheel and you're doing donuts in a parking lot. You still need a destination. Clear isn't arguing for aimlessness. Goals set the direction. The problem is, we spend 90% of our time staring at the steering wheel and 10% maintaining the engine. Fix the inputs and the outputs become a near mathematical certainty. So if we're pulling focus away from the outcome, what are we actually targeting? This is where the book gets into the actual architecture of behavior change. And it's the part most summaries rush past to get to the 4 laws. But if you miss this, the 4 laws are just productivity tips. With it, there's something else entirely. Clear describes 3 levels at which change can occur. Think of them as the concentric layers of an onion. The outermost layer is outcomes. What you get. Losing weight. Publishing a book. Saving money. This is where almost everyone sets their focus. The middle layer is processes. What you do. Your training routine, your budgeting system, your daily workflow. Most productivity advice lives here, and it's better than focusing on outcomes. but it's still not the deepest layer. So since our brains demand immediate satisfaction, we have to artificially engineer it into our good habits. If you want to stop ordering takeout and start cooking at home, every time you cook a meal instead of ordering, you immediately transfer $30 into a savings account, labeled something meaningful, a holiday, a new car, whatever matters to you. You get the immediate visual satisfaction of watching that number go up. That satisfies the brain's demand for an instant signal that the behavior was worth it, and it reinforces the habit at the neurological level before the delayed benefits ever arrive. But this raises the hardest question in the entire framework. What happens when you do all of this correctly? You design your environment, you bundle your temptations, you execute the 2-minute rule every day, you engineer your immediate rewards, and absolutely nothing changes. This is the crux of it. This is the exact moment where most people quit. And to explain why it happens, Clear uses a metaphor that I think is genuinely one of the best in any self-improvement book written in the last 20 years. Imagine an ice cube sitting on a table in front of you. The room is cold. You can see your breath. It's currently 25 degrees Fahrenheit. The room slowly begins to heat up. 26 degrees, 27, 28. The temperature is rising. You are putting in the effort, and the ice cube is sitting there completely unchanged. 29, 30, 31 degrees. Still nothing. Then it hits 32. The ice begins to melt. 1 degree, seemingly identical to every temperature increase before it, has suddenly unlocked a massive physical transformation. And the physics of that metaphor mirror the biology of human progress almost exactly. And the physics of that metaphor mirror the biology of human progress almost exactly. Did the heat only start working at 32 degrees? No. Every single degree from 25 to 31 was doing real work. The energy was not being wasted, it was being stored. Clear calls this phase of invisible progress the plateau of latent potential. And this is precisely what causes the frustration that kills most habit attempts. We expect human progress to be linear. You run on the treadmill every day for 3 weeks, step on the scale, and haven't lost a single pound, so you quit. But in reality, you quit at 31 degrees. You mistook the absence of visible results for the absence of progress. The metabolic changes were happening. The cellular adaptations were building. The energy was being stored. You just hadn't breached the melting point yet. This pattern shows up everywhere. Bamboo can barely be seen for its first 5 years as it builds an extensive root system underground, and then it explodes 90 feet into the air within 6 weeks. Tectonic plates grind against each other for millennia, building immense pressure until one day they shift an inch and an earthquake erupts. Systemic change accumulates invisibly for a long time before it happens all at once. Living inside that waiting period is what Clear calls the valley of disappointment. The painful gap between what you think should be happening linearly and what is actually happening beneath the surface. So how do you survive that valley when your brain is demanding a reward that hasn't arrived yet? You rely on one rule. It's buried somewhat deep in the book, and most summaries treat it as a footnote. It is not a footnote. It is the linchpin of long-term survival. Never miss twice. Missing once is an accident. It is statistically insignificant over a 10-year timeline. Your car breaks down, you get the flu, you have to stay late at work, you miss a day. That happens. But missing twice is the beginning of a new habit. It is the start of a behavioral spiral. The moment one streak ends, your singular focus has to be starting the next one immediately. The psychology of the miss is genuinely fascinating. If you miss one workout, your muscles don't atrophy. The physical cost is practically zero. But the psychological cost of missing 2 or 3 in a row is catastrophic because it damages the innermost layer of the onion we talked about earlier. It degrades your identity. The internal narrative quietly shifts from "I am someone who works out and had a bad day" to "I used to work out, but I guess I'm just not that person." This is the all-or-nothing cognitive distortion at its most destructive. The belief that if you can't execute a habit perfectly, there's no point doing it at all. If you only have 10 minutes for a 45-minute workout, you skip it entirely. But showing up on your worst days is mathematically and psychologically more valuable than showing up on your best days. Here's why. Think about the asymmetry of compounding. If you start with $100 and achieve a 50% gain, you're at $150, but you only need a 33% loss to fall all the way back to $100. Avoiding that 33% loss is exactly as valuable as achieving the 50% gain. When you do 5 minutes of terrible push-ups on a day you want to quit, you are not trying to improve your fitness, you are preventing a loss. You are protecting your identity as the type of person who does not miss. You are keeping the compounding chain intact. That reframes a bad day entirely. But before we commit to protecting these systems forever, there's a question we have to ask that most productivity culture refuses to engage with honestly. Are we building the right systems in the first place? This is where Clear incorporates genetics and natural inclination, an area that is almost completely ignored in mainstream self-improvement. The culture says if you just work hard enough, you can do anything. Biology says the picture is more complicated than that. Habits compound exponentially faster when they align with your natural genetic inclinations. Genes don't determine your destiny, but they absolutely determine your areas of opportunity. If you are naturally heavily muscled and stocky, you will face significant friction trying to become an elite rock climber. You might naturally excel at powerlifting. If you are a naturally competitive person, forcing yourself to meditate alone in a dark room to manage stress is probably working against your wiring. Joining a competitive martial arts gym might deliver the same outcome with a fraction of the resistance. Joining a competitive martial arts gym might deliver the same outcome with a fraction of the resistance. The goal is to find the environment where your natural traits are an advantage rather than a liability. To find that environment, you have to navigate what computer scientists and evolutionary biologists call the explore-exploit trade-off. When you begin a new pursuit or start looking for a habit that genuinely fits your identity, you should spend time exploring. Try a lot of different things. Work out in the morning, then the evening. Try running, swimming, cycling, weightlifting. You are gathering data without committing. You are actively searching for the intersection of your natural inclination and your effort. The question you are trying to answer is specific. Where does your normal feel like someone else's hard work? Where does your baseline sit above other people's maximum effort? Once you locate that intersection, you shift strategy. You stop tinkering with variables. You lock down the system and double down on execution to maximize your compounding returns. Because every hour you spend exploring after you've found your sweet spot is an hour of lost compounding. And every hour you spend exploiting the wrong path is an hour of completely wasted effort. It all sounds perfectly engineered, doesn't it? The dopamine vote, the 32-degree ice cube, the explore-exploit algorithm. But this is where I think we have to do something most discussions of this book don't bother to do. Look honestly at where this machinery breaks down when it meets the real world. Because it does break down. And the places where it breaks down matter. The most glaring unstated assumption in Atomic Habits, and honestly in most habit literature, is the assumption about environment. The entire framework relies on your ability to meaningfully design and control the space you live and work in. And for a significant portion of the people who will read this book, that assumption is a luxury they simply do not have. This book, like most productivity literature, carries a Western, individualistic, middle-class bias that it never acknowledges. Clear talks about putting fruit on the counter to prompt healthy eating, designing a distraction-free workspace to write a book. That is mathematically sound advice. If you have a kitchen counter you control, the disposable income to buy fresh produce, and a dedicated room you can close a door on. If you are an hourly worker, juggling 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, and living in a crowded, high-stress environment, the friction between you and a good habit is not a psychological puzzle that the 2-minute rule will solve. The friction is structural. It is material. If you work shifts that rotate from days to nights every 2 weeks, you cannot anchor a new habit to a consistent morning routine because your morning literally changes every 14 days. Applying a micro-productivity hack to that situation is like trying to stop a flood with a sponge. The problem is not your system. The problem is the larger system you are living inside, and that is a distinction the book does not make honestly enough. There is a second critique that comes from the neurodivergent community, specifically around ADHD, and it exposes a foundational neurological gap in the model. Atomic Habits assumes a baseline neurological capacity for consistency. The central metaphor of the book is that habits compound like financial interest, but interest only compounds if you leave the money in the account. For someone with ADHD, leaving the money in the account is precisely the neurological deficit. It is not a willpower problem. It is not a motivation problem. It is a structural difference in how the brain processes reward and dopamine. Researchers like Dr. Russell Barkley have documented extensively that a neurotypical brain can visualize a reward 3 months from now and release enough dopamine today to motivate action toward it. An ADHD brain cannot do this reliably. The concept of a delayed return environment, the entire operating condition that Law 4 is designed to address, is not just difficult for an ADHD brain to navigate. In many cases, it is neurologically impossible without external scaffolding. If the reward is not immediate, it might as well not exist. The future reward gets immediately hijacked by whatever novel stimulus is present right now, delivering a far larger instant dopamine hit. Telling someone with ADHD to endure the valley of disappointment and trust in slow identity-based shifts is not just unhelpful, it can actively set them up for a cycle of shame. They don't have the neurological hardware to run the Atomic Habits software out of the box. What they need is different: external accountability structures, body doubling, having someone physically present while they work, artificially large immediate consequences, and an experimental mindset where any habit is a short-term trial rather than a permanent identity commitment. If the habit drops after a month, that is not an identity failure. It is just time to rotate to a new stimulus. And even for neurotypical brains, the reality of progress is rarely as clean as the book suggests. Habit researcher Dr. Gina Cleo points out that human progress does not follow clean mathematics. The 1% better everyday graph is a beautiful motivational metaphor. It is not biological reality. Habits form in chaotic jumps, long plateaus, and messy fluctuations. Some days you move forward by 5%. Other days, stress pushes you back by 3%. Real behavioral change looks more like a child's scribble than a clean 45-degree upward trend line. The middle layer is processes. What you do, your training routine, your budgeting system, your daily workflow. Most productivity advice lives right here, and it's better than focusing on outcomes alone, but it's still not the deepest layer. The innermost layer, the absolute core, is identity. What you believe, your worldview, your self-image, your deepest assumptions about who you actually are. Most people approach habit change from the outside in. They start with the outcome they want, figure out the process to get there, and just kind of hope their identity eventually catches up. But Clear's argument, and this is the real thesis of the book, is that it has to work the other way around, inside out. Identity first. There's a perfect example in the book that makes this crystal clear. 2 people trying to quit smoking. Someone offers them both a cigarette. The first person says, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." Sounds reasonable, but linguistically and psychologically, that person still believes they are a smoker. They are a smoker attempting to do something unnatural to their own identity. They're hoping their behavior will change while carrying around the exact same core belief about who they are. The cognitive dissonance is exhausting. It takes constant willpower to act against your own self-image, and willpower always runs out eventually. The second person says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." It's a tiny semantic difference. It represents a massive shift. Smoking is framed as part of their past, not their present identity. They aren't resisting a cigarette. They're simply acting in accordance with who they now are. A non-smoker doesn't need willpower to turn down a cigarette. It's just not what they do. This points to a fundamental psychological truth. Behavior that is incongruent with the self will not last. You may want to be wealthy, but if your identity is someone who consumes rather than creates, you will keep self-sabotaging and spending the money. Motivation might get you to the gym on day 1. The only reason you'll be there on day 100 is because it has become part of your identity. The goal isn't to read a book. The goal is to become a reader. The goal isn't to run a marathon. The goal is to become a runner. The marathon is just the day the identity becomes visible to other people. But that leaves a massive practical gap. How do you actually change your identity? You can't stand in front of a mirror chanting affirmations until you believe them. The brain is too smart for that. It requires actual proof, and that proof comes from your habits. Clear argues that your identity emerges from your repeated actions. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. Think of it like a political election happening inside your brain. You don't need a unanimous vote to win an election. You just need a majority. You don't have to be perfect. If you eat pizza on Friday night, you cast one vote for the unhealthy person. But if you worked out 3 times that week and drank water instead of soda, you cast 10 votes for the healthy person. The healthy person still wins the election. It's the aggregate of evidence that matters, not any single data point. That distinction removes the paralysis of perfectionism entirely. You're not trying to be flawless, you're trying to build a majority of evidence over time. So the real question becomes, how do you design your life so that casting the right votes is basically automatic? To answer that, you have to understand the neuroscience of the habit loop, the underlying software running in your brain every single second of the day. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine built to conserve energy. When you face a recurring situation, your brain automates the solution to reduce cognitive load. That automation happens in 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. And here's where most people completely misunderstand how this works. The common assumption is that the reward is what causes the habit. But the neuroscience says something much stranger. There were these classic experiments: monkeys, a light, a drop of juice. Researchers found that the dopamine spike, the brain's primary learning signal, doesn't happen when the monkey gets the juice. After the habit is formed, the dopamine spike happens when the monkey sees the light. The cue itself triggers the chemical reward. This is called the dopamine prediction error. Your brain learns to anticipate the reward before the action even occurs. So the cue triggers your brain to notice an opportunity. The craving is the motivational force that follows. And to be precise, you're never actually craving the habit itself. You're craving the change in internal state it promises. You don't crave a cigarette. You crave the relief from anxiety that a cigarette delivers. The cigarette is just the vehicle. Then comes the response, the action you take. And finally, the reward, which satisfies the craving and teaches your brain to repeat the whole cycle next time. Clear takes this neurological loop and translates it into a tactical framework. The 4 laws of behavior change, 1 law for each stage of the loop. Law 1, the cue, make it obvious. The inverse for breaking bad habits, make it invisible. This is entirely about environment design, and we massively overestimate the role of willpower here, while drastically underestimating the role of our surroundings. We like to think of ourselves as autonomous agents, making independent, rational choices. We are not. We are highly reactive to the visual cues around us. If I buy a bag of chocolate and put it at eye level in the pantry, I will eat the entire thing within days. Not because I sat down and decided to eat chocolate, but because every time I open that pantry, the cue hits my eyes, spikes my dopamine, and the routine initiates. It's automatic. I wasn't even hungry. If you want to eat more fruit, don't write "eat more fruit" in a journal. Put a bowl of fruit in the center of your kitchen counter. If you want to practice guitar, don't leave it in a case in a closet. Put it on a stand in the middle of your living room. The people with the greatest apparent self-control aren't exercising heroic willpower. They've simply structured their environments so heroic willpower is never required. They spend less time in tempting situations to begin with. And to break a bad habit, don't fight the craving. Remove the cue. Delete the app. Move the thing. Make it invisible, and the craving has nothing to latch onto. Law 2. The craving. Make it attractive. The more appealing something is, the more likely it becomes habit-forming. To manufacture that attraction artificially, Clear leans heavily on a concept called temptation bundling, pioneered by behavioral economist Katie Milkman. You pair an action you want to do with an action you need to do. The classic example, only allow yourself to watch your favorite show while you're on the treadmill. You're bundling the immediate dopamine hit of the show with the delayed benefit of the exercise, An existing craving pulls you through a difficult action. Now, I want to challenge this slightly because I think it has real limits. If I only ever watch my favorite show while I'm exhausted and sweating and miserable on a treadmill, will my brain eventually start associating the show with the misery? Could I ruin the thing I enjoy? The honest answer is yes. That's a real risk. Temptation bundling only works when the friction of the required task is manageable. You can't bundle eating plain kale with watching a movie and expect it to hold. If the negative stimulus is overwhelming, it will crush the positive one entirely, which is exactly why the third law exists. Law 3, the response, make it easy. This is where we have to address one of the most dangerous traps in habit building, the difference between motion and action. Motion is planning, strategizing, researching, outlining the 20 chapters of the book you want to write, spending 3 hours reading reviews of running shoes. Motion feels incredibly productive. It feels like progress, but motion never delivers a result by itself. Action is the specific behavior that actually produces the outcome. Sitting down and writing one terrible paragraph, putting on your old sneakers and jogging for 5 minutes. I've done this myself. I once decided I was going to start lifting weights. I spent 3 weeks researching powerlifting programs, watching tutorials on squat form, buying specialist knee sleeves, and then never went to the gym. My heart rate never went above resting. That was all motion. And it felt like getting fit, but it was a delay tactic dressed up as preparation. We default to motion because it lets us feel like we're making progress without risking failure. You cannot fail at researching a workout, but if you actually go to the gym and pick up a heavy weight, you might fail. Motion is safer, which is exactly why it keeps you stuck. From a neurobiological standpoint, repetition is everything. Every time you perform an action, you activate a specific neural circuit. Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. Repeated activation strengthens the synaptic connections through a process called long-term potentiation. What matters isn't how long you've been doing a habit. It's the frequency of repetitions that encodes the behavior into your basal ganglia and makes it automatic. So how do you guarantee you get those repetitions, especially on days you don't feel like it? The 2-minute rule. Take any new habit and scale it down until it takes under 2 minutes to complete. Read before bed becomes read 1 page. Do 45 minutes of yoga becomes roll out my yoga mat. The goal isn't the full workout. The goal isn't the finished chapter. The goal is to master the art of showing up, to cast that small, undeniable vote for the identity you're building. A habit has to be established before it can be improved. You cannot optimize a behavior that doesn't exist yet. Law 4, the reward. Make it satisfying. This is where the whole framework collides with a biological reality that Clear is honest about, but most summaries gloss over. The cardinal rule of behavior change. What is immediately rewarded is repeated. What is immediately punished is avoided. Simple enough in theory. But here's the problem. Modern humans live in a delayed return environment. You go to work today, your paycheck arrives in 2 weeks. You eat well today, your health improves next year. You save money today, you retire in 30 years. But your brain did not evolve in a delayed return environment. For hundreds of thousands of years, human survival was immediate. Find food today, build a fire tonight, run from the predator right now. We have Paleolithic hardware trying to run modern software. We are wired to value the present overwhelmingly more than the future, and that biological reality is precisely why bad habits are so effortless to form. The immediate consequence of smoking is stress relief and a nicotine hit. The delayed consequence is emphysema. The immediate consequence of scrolling social media is a dopamine spike. The delayed consequence is an unlived life. With good habits, it's the opposite. The immediate consequence is almost always uncomfortable. Sweating at the gym, feeling stupid while learning a language, passing up a purchase to save money, while the actual reward is months or years away. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If this book has these massive blind spots, if it ignores poverty and systemic barriers, if its fundamental neurological premise fails neurodivergent brains, if it paints an overly sanitized picture of what progress actually looks like, why did it sell 15 million copies? Are we all just buying a fantasy of control? I don't think so. And I want to be careful here, because dismissing the book entirely would be its own form of intellectual laziness. What Clear did, and did brilliantly, is synthesis. He didn't invent operant conditioning. He drew from Charles Duhigg, B.J. Fogg, the dopamine research of Wolfram Schultz, and decades of behavioral psychology. He didn't discover new science. He packaged existing science into a framework so coherent, so emotionally resonant, and so practically actionable that 15 million people actually finished it and felt equipped to do something differently. That is genuinely hard to do, and it deserves acknowledgement, but as with any tool, you have to understand its edges. A scalpel is one of the most precise instruments ever designed. It is also completely useless for chopping down a tree. If you try to use it for that, you will feel incompetent and frustrated, but that is not a failure of your identity. It is simply the wrong tool for the context. Atomic Habits is an exceptional scalpel. Know what it is built to cut, and know what it isn't. With all of that said, the limits acknowledged, the blind spots named, there is one tool in this book that I think is the most structurally sound idea in it. It's called habit stacking. Habit stacking is a specific variation of what researchers call an implementation intention, a concept with roots in the work of B.J. Fogg. The formula is simple to the point of feeling almost too simple, but I want you to actually memorize this sentence before this episode ends. After I do current habit, I will do new habit. The reason it works so reliably is that it bypasses the cue phase of the habit loop almost entirely. You don't have to wait for motivation. You don't have to engineer a new visual trigger from scratch. You are anchoring a fragile, unformed behavior to a sturdy, deeply established one, borrowing the neurological momentum of a habit that has already been encoded into your basal ganglia through thousands of repetitions over your lifetime. It also solves a problem that almost nobody talks about. Time is a terrible cue. If you set an alarm for 7 p.m. to read a book, it will fail. The time means nothing if the context around it keeps changing. But saying, after I pour my morning coffee, I will meditate, anchors the habit to a physical event. There's a study that makes the empirical power of this concrete. A master's thesis from the University of Zurich by Michael Zurn, who built an application called Hebb. The app first analyzed each user's evening routines to identify neurological anchors, deeply ingrained actions they already performed every night without thinking. Users were required to form explicit habit stacks. After I lock the front door, I will write down 3 things. After I plug in my phone, I will do box breathing. But the most critical finding is one that should change how we think about productivity apps. Frequent reminders can cause your brain to form a dependency on the app itself. The digital notification becomes the cue instead of the physical environment, which means the moment the app breaks or your phone is in another room, the habit disappears. To counter this, Hebb intentionally phased out its own reminders. It forced the brain to transfer the cue from the digital notification back to the sensory experience, the sound of the deadbolt, the smell of the coffee. The sensory experience itself becomes the trigger. The ultimate goal is a system that runs automatically, completely independent of external reminders. So let's pull back and look at the full arc of what we covered today. We started by dismantling the cult of goal setting, establishing that outcomes are just temporary symptoms. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. We moved inward to identity, the realization that every action is a vote for the type of person you are becoming, not a declaration, a vote. Small, cumulative. We map the neuroscience through the 4 laws, making cues obvious, attractive, easy, and engineering immediate rewards to bridge the gap in our brains. We stared at the 32-degree ice cube and the plateau of latent potential, that when nothing seems to be happening, the energy is being stored. Most people quit at 31 degrees. We adopted the one rule that protects everything else, never miss twice, protecting the compounding chain not by being perfect, but by always coming back. We looked honestly at where the framework breaks, the socioeconomic barriers, the neurodivergent brains, the messiness of real human progress. And we armed ourselves with the one tool that survives all of those critiques, habit stacking, borrowing the momentum of who you already are to build who you want to become. That is the journey. If your identity is simply the accumulated sum of your actions, then look closely at what you do on autopilot. Ask yourself, What identity are your habits silently voting for? Take that question with you. I'll see you in the next one.